The room was already tense when Karoline Leavitt leaned forward, her voice sharp and dismissive, cutting across the chamber like a blade. Cameras whirred to attention, zooming in as she delivered the kind of jab meant to sting, meant to belittle. With a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips, she waved a hand toward Alexandria Ocasio Cortez as if brushing aside an annoyance rather than addressing a sitting member of Congress. Frankly, she scoffed, some people here are better at Instagram posts than actual policy. And it shows. The air shifted. You could feel it. A murmur rippled through the audience, some gasping outright, others leaning forward in disbelief. The insult wasn't clever. It was calculated, an attempt to reduce one of the most visible women of color in American politics to nothing more than an internet caricature. Leavitt's eyes gleamed with the certainty that she'd scored her point. But across from her, AOC did not flinch. She didn't fidget. She didn't blink. The silence that followed belonged entirely to her, as if the chamber itself recognized that the real answer had not yet been spoken. Cameras locked on her face, waiting. Supporters in the crowd held their breath. Even Leavitt, for all her swagger, seemed to anticipate something coming back. And then it arrived, calm, precise, almost surgical. AOC's voice cut through the silence, not with anger, but with control. "Congresswoman," she began, pausing just long enough to let the word linger. "When a woman of color rises in this country, there will always be those who try to drag her back down. But if all you see is Instagram posts, perhaps it says more about your screen time than my service." The chamber erupted. Gasps gave way to cheers, the kind that start small and build into thunder. Leavitt's smirk faltered, her composure cracking under the sudden weight of the crowd's reaction. The cameras captured it all. The poise of AOC, the unraveling of Leavitt, the electricity in the air as the balance of power in that moment shifted entirely. And what happened next had the entire crowd on its feet. What had unfolded in that chamber was not just another exchange of barbed words between politicians. It was something far more symbolic, a collision of two Americas staring each other down across the same room. On one side, Karoline Leavitt, sharp-tongued and dismissive, embodied a politics of arrogance. A politics that thrives on belittling, mocking, and reducing opponents to caricatures. On the other stood Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, calm yet unyielding, representing a politics of dignity, resilience, and a belief in service that transcends personal attacks. Why did this moment matter? Because in an era where democracy feels fragile, every public confrontation carries weight beyond its four walls. Every insult echoes across millions of screens. Every reply has the power to either restore faith in our institutions or further erode them. The chamber wasn't just filled with lawmakers and reporters. It was filled with the eyes of America, each person watching to see whose vision of politics would prevail. For progressives, immigrants, and anyone who has ever been told to stay in their place, Leavitt's words carried the sting of familiarity. They weren't just aimed at AOC. They were aimed at every young woman who has been dismissed as just a pretty face. Every immigrant told their work will never measure up. Every working class person mocked for daring to dream beyond survival. The stakes were identity, dignity, and the promise of equality. And for AOC, the reply was not only about defending herself, it was about defending those voices too often silenced. Her calm answer wasn't merely a comeback, it was a reclamation of power. It sent a message that the future of America doesn't belong to those who mock, but to those who rise with integrity. But here's where the tension grew, because moments like these are never left alone. Arrogance rarely retreats quietly. The cameras, now fully trained on a smoldering expression across Leavitt's face, caught something unmistakable. She wasn't done. The smirk was gone, replaced with something harder, sharper, more determined. She had come into that room ready for a fight, and being outshone so easily was a wound she couldn't allow to stand. And this is what raised the stakes even higher. The recognition that what was about to happen next wouldn't be about a single insult or even a single clapback. It would be about the future of discourse in America. Would arrogance dominate yet again, or would dignity prove it could withstand the storm? The crowd shifted uneasily. Supporters of AOC felt the satisfaction of victory, but it was mixed with a nervous anticipation. Viewers at home paused in mid-scroll, sensing that this was only the beginning, because history has shown us, when the powerful feel humiliated, they lash out harder. And that is exactly what Karoline Leavitt did. But then the antagonist doubled down. Karoline Leavitt did not arrive in American politics by accident. Her rise was as deliberate as it was brash, fueled not by quiet diligence or patient coalition building, but by a strategy as old as demagoguery itself. Make noise, attract headlines, and never apologize for arrogance. She was young, one of the youngest voices to storm into the national spotlight, and she wore that youth like armor. To her allies, it made her fresh, unfiltered, a new face unburdened by the cautious etiquette of seasoned politicians. To her critics, it made her reckless, intoxicated with the sound of her own provocations. She built her brand not on policy nuance, but on sound bites sharp enough to cut through the clutter of the news cycle. Her speeches rarely wandered into the weeds of legislation. Instead, they lashed out at opponents with crafted insults designed to go viral. She was combative by design, performing politics as combat theater, where victory was measured in retweets and headlines rather than substance or progress. Each jab was calculated to create friction, and each dismissal of an opponent fed her image as the young warrior of the right, unafraid to say what others won't. But beneath that bravado was a hollow core. For all her fiery declarations, few could point to a serious policy achievement attached to her name. Critics noted how often her talking points mirrored the same recycled tropes of older figures: anti-immigrant rhetoric, dismissals of climate science, mockery of progressive leaders, only delivered with more youthful venom. Her aggression was marketed as authenticity, but it too often revealed itself as inexperience wearing a mask of confidence. In debates and public appearances, this style worked for a time. She thrived in environments where her interruptions and barbs could dominate, where the sheer force of her voice drowned out others. She understood the mechanics of viral outrage, how to bait a headline by mocking someone's appearance or trivializing their identity. And in a political culture addicted to conflict, her abrasiveness became her currency. Yet arrogance is a dangerous currency. It buys attention, but it also accrues debt. The very brashness that propelled Leavitt forward left her blind to how fragile her foundation was. Because arrogance has one fatal flaw: it mistakes noise for substance, headlines for history, humiliation for victory. Observers noticed the cracks even before her showdown with AOC. In quieter committee hearings, her lack of preparation showed. When pressed for detail beyond a talking point, she stumbled, often deflecting with yet another insult rather than offering depth. To her supporters, this was owning the libs. To her detractors, it was proof that she was little more than a provocateur. And the more she leaned into the persona of the combative outsider, the more she defined herself not by what she stood for, but by whom she chose to tear down. It was this habit, this relentless need to belittle, that brought her to that chamber, facing Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. For Leavitt, the calculus was simple. AOC was a symbol. Young, progressive, Latina, unapologetically outspoken. She represented everything Leavitt's base loved to hate. Mocking her wasn't just political theater, it was brand management. By going after AOC, she could secure clips that would play on conservative media, tweets that would circle the digital echo chambers, and fundraising emails that painted her as a fearless warrior against the left. But here is where arrogance betrays even the cleverest opportunist. In her eagerness to humiliate AOC, Leavitt miscalculated. She believed the crowd would reward aggression, that belittling AOC as an Instagram politician would reduce her opponent to a punchline. What she didn't see, what arrogance blinded her to, was that the very room she was speaking in had changed. America had changed. Audiences no longer only rewarded volume. They rewarded clarity, dignity, composure. They were hungry for someone who could rise above the chaos rather than sink into it. And that is why her smirk, her dismissive hand wave, her careless jab carried so much risk. In her mind, she was controlling the stage. In reality, she was digging a hole deeper than she could escape, because arrogance always carries a blind spot. And for Karoline Leavitt, that blind spot was about to become her undoing. Long before Alexandria Ocasio Cortez became the face of a new progressive generation in Congress, she was simply Alex from the Bronx. Her story did not begin with privilege or pedigree, but with subway commutes, long hours, and a family bound together by sacrifice. Her mother, an immigrant from Puerto Rico, cleaned houses to help keep food on the table. Her father, an architect, worked tirelessly until his untimely passing, leaving the family not with wealth, but with the lingering weight of grief and bills. These were the circumstances that shaped her. The daily grind of a working class home where dignity wasn't given, it was fought for. Growing up, she lived the contradictions of America. By day, she attended school in a wealthier district thanks to her parents' determination to secure her a better education. By night, she returned to a modest apartment where money was always tight. She saw firsthand how class divides are not abstract debates but lived realities, how some kids had every resource at their fingertips, while others worked twice as hard only to scrape by. These memories would later fuel her politics, but at the time they simply shaped her resilience. She learned early that being underestimated could either crush you or sharpen you. That sharpening defined her 20s. After college, when many peers from more privileged backgrounds slid into internships or think tanks, AOC worked shifts as a bartender and waitress. She poured drinks, wiped down counters, and hustled through the long hours that millions of working-class Americans know all too well. Critics would later sneer at that chapter of her life, using it as ammunition to belittle her credentials. But she embraced it. To her, those years weren't a detour from politics. They were the foundation. Because in every late-night shift, in every conversation with a struggling coworker or customer, she learned more about real America than 1,000 policy memos could ever teach. Her authenticity sprang from that lived reality. She wasn't a politician pretending to understand working families. She was a working family. And that authenticity became her greatest weapon when she decided, against every odd, to run for Congress in 2018. She was young. She had no institutional backing. She challenged Joe Crowley, a powerful Democratic incumbent who hadn't faced a primary challenger in over a decade. The pundits laughed. The media ignored her. Crowley himself barely acknowledged her existence. And yet she walked block by block, knocking on doors, listening, connecting. She didn't campaign with big money. She campaigned with authenticity. When voters opened their doors, they didn't see a polished, scripted insider. They saw someone who looked like their daughter, their neighbor, the woman who might serve them a drink at the local diner. They saw someone who spoke with conviction about healthcare, wages, and justice, not in abstract terms, but as matters of survival. Her upset victory sent shockwaves through Washington. Overnight, the woman once dismissed as just a bartender became one of the most recognizable faces in American politics. But fame did not soften her. Instead, it placed her under constant fire. From her first days in office, she became a target, not just of conservative opponents, but of skeptics who doubted her intellect, her seriousness, her right to hold power. She endured sneers on the House floor, tabloid mockery, and relentless attacks online. Yet through it all, she developed a survival skill that became her signature. Composure under fire. Her quick wit became legend. When confronted with sexist jabs, she parried with grace sharp enough to sting, but never descending into pettiness. When accused of being inexperienced, she wielded facts so precisely that critics were left sputtering. And when mocked for her identity, she turned those insults into rallying cries, lifting not just herself, but the millions who saw themselves in her. For the immigrant child watching from the sidelines, for the young woman told she was too loud, too brown, too ambitious, AOC's rise was validation. She didn't just hold her ground. She transformed every attack into an opportunity to speak a deeper truth. That resilience became her armor, not hard and steel, but something more enduring. Conviction. And it was precisely that conviction that she carried into the chamber the day Karoline Leavitt tried to humiliate her. For Leavitt, the insult was a cheap jab meant to rattle. For AOC, it was familiar ground. She had been underestimated before. She had been sneered at before. She had been told she didn't belong before. Each time she had responded not with fury, but with poise. Not with noise, but with clarity. And in this moment, all of that resilience would come roaring to the surface. The chamber had barely settled from AOC's first counter when Karoline Leavitt leaned forward again, her eyes flashing with something closer to desperation than confidence. She could feel the grip on the room slipping, and with cameras fixed on her, she wasn't about to let the moment pass. Her voice rose, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about," she snapped. Congresswoman Ocasio Cortez would rather play the victim than talk about the facts. She hides behind identity politics because she doesn't have real solutions. Gas rippled across the audience. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered furiously to neighbors. It was a line intended to sting, one conservatives had repeated for years. But here it carried the brittle sound of overreach. The more Leavitt pressed, the more her tone hardened into something shrill. She interrupted over and over, trying to talk past AOC, raising her voice as though volume could cover for substance. "Americans don't need Instagram speeches," she sneered. They need leaders who actually get results, not hashtags. Her hands punctuated the words with dismissive gestures, slicing the air as though to physically erase her opponent's presence. And yet, through it all, AOC remained steady. She didn't match the interruptions. She didn't raise her voice. She let Leavitt talk. Let her dig the hole deeper, a faint glimmer of amusement flickering in her eyes as if to say, keep going. The contrast was striking, Leavitt's fury bouncing off the calm poise of her opponent. It was a visual metaphor of noise versus composure, arrogance versus dignity. The crowd could feel the shift. Every new interruption from Leavitt only drew more disapproval, each sneer echoing less like strength and more like weakness. Viewers at home noticed it too, posting clips in real time. Why is she so rattled? She's losing it. Finally, the moderator attempted to rein in the chaos, but Leavitt barreled on, voice cutting across both him and AOC. You know what's really sad? That people like her think being loud on social media is the same as governing. This country doesn't need influencers. It needs leaders. The words hung in the air, heavy with condescension. It was supposed to be the dagger, the final blow. Instead, the room seemed to freeze, as though everyone sensed that the ground beneath Leavitt had just crumbled. Because in that pause, before AOC even opened her mouth, the audience knew something was coming. The cameras tightened their focus. The murmurs gave way to silence, the kind of silence that carries its own electricity, charged with anticipation. AOC leaned forward ever so slightly, her voice calm but edged with precision. The room braced itself, every ear tuned to her reply. And then, with one line, AOC flipped the entire room. For a heartbeat, the room was frozen. You could almost hear the hum of the cameras, the shuffle of a notebook closing, the faint clearing of a throat somewhere in the gallery. All of it seemed to fade, as AOC leaned just slightly forward, her voice steady, deliberate, almost surgical. "Congresswoman Leavitt," she began, not raising her tone, but commanding the silence that surrounded her. You keep confusing noise with leadership. But yelling doesn't make you right, and dismissing people's identities doesn't erase their struggles. The words landed with a weight that wasn't just audible. It was felt. A hush swept the crowd, a collective intake of breath. Every syllable carved through the bluster that had filled the room just seconds earlier. AOC wasn't rushing, wasn't scrambling to catch up to Leavitt's volume. She was slowing everything down, letting her cadence slice like a blade through the fog. She continued, her eyes locked on her opponent. You say social media isn't leadership. Well, maybe it isn't leadership when you're just chasing headlines. But when a waitress from the Bronx can reach millions of working families directly, unfiltered by billionaires or partisan spin, that's democracy in action. That's people having a voice. A murmur of approval rolled through the audience. Heads nodded. A few scattered claps broke out, quickly stifled by the tension of the moment. Leavitt shifted in her seat, lips tightening, the brash confidence from earlier starting to look like something else. Unease. But AOC wasn't done. She leaned into the pause, letting silence itself carry power, then struck again. You call it playing the victim when I speak about identity. But my identity is millions of Americans' reality. It's the immigrant child working 2 jobs. It's the black mother fighting to be heard at City Hall. It's the queer teen wondering if their government cares about their safety. If that makes me a victim in your eyes, then maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is a system that only sees leadership when it looks like you. The chamber erupted, cheers bursting like fireworks, applause echoing off marble walls. The moderator's gavel tried to bring order, but it was useless. The crowd was alive, voices rising in waves of affirmation. It wasn't just support. It was recognition, validation, a roar of finally someone said it. Leavitt sat rigid, her jaw tightening as the sound washed over her. She attempted a smile, the kind that comes out more like a grimace, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted looking for footing, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. The energy had shifted so dramatically, it was as if the ground itself had moved under her. AOC waited. She didn't ride the cheers, then bask in them. She stood still, hands folded, letting the crowd's reaction rise and fall naturally. Then, with a composure that only amplified the drama, she spoke again, this time softer but no less commanding. The truth is, she said, voice resonant in its calm, leadership isn't about how loud you can shout over others. Leadership is about listening. About knowing that the people we represent don't all look like us, don't all live like us, but they all deserve dignity. If that threatens you, then maybe it's not me you're fighting, it's the future of this country. That was the dagger. The applause returned, louder, more sustained, people on their feet now. their energy impossible to contain. The cameras zoomed in, capturing AOC's unwavering posture and Leavitt's tightening expression, a side-by-side contrast that told the entire story without a single caption. Leavitt opened her mouth, searching for a comeback, but nothing came. Her words, once sharp and aggressive, now stumbled over themselves. "Well, that's not what I meant," she muttered, but the microphone betrayed her, catching the falter in full clarity. Her rehearsed bravado collapsed into hesitation. The silence between AOC's words thundered louder than Leavitt's entire rant. That silence, intentional, purposeful, had become a weapon. It made every line AOC delivered feel monumental, and every stammer from Leavitt feel like an implosion. Observers tweeted in real time, "This is the knockout blow. AOC just ended her." Clips spread like wildfire across social feeds, the contrast between dignity and chaos looping endlessly. Leavitt fidgeted with her papers, shuffled them, tried to recover. "See, this is the problem," she finally forced out, her tone brittle. You twist things. You make it all emotional. But the American people want facts, not feelings." It was supposed to be her reset, her chance to regain the offensive, but AOC only tilted her head, almost amused before delivering the final nail. "Facts?" she said calmly. "Here's a fact. Shouting down women, immigrants, and working families has never solved a single problem in this country. But listening to them, that's how we've built every piece of progress worth keeping." The crowd roared again, some rising to clap, others chanting her name. The moderator gave up entirely on restoring order. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It had become a moment, a reckoning, the kind of exchange that would live beyond the headlines. Leavitt's face flushed. She tried to interject, but every word dissolved into the tidal wave of applause. She wasn't just losing the argument, she was being humiliated in real time, on a stage she had once imagined as her proving ground. And AOC? She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply stood firm, her expression steady, her voice having already carved the truth into the moment. The emotional climax was undeniable. The chamber was alive, reverberating with cheers, with gasps that had turned into a thunderous affirmation. This wasn't just about one-liners or political points. It was about dignity reclaiming its space against arrogance, about substance silencing noise. And as the crowd finally began to settle, as the echoes of applause still lingered, the reality became clear. Leavitt had been dismantled not by fury, not by force, but by clarity, composure, and truth. But the impact didn't stop in that room. The moment the gavel struck to adjourn, the chamber was still buzzing with the echoes of applause. But outside those walls, the true storm was only just beginning. Within minutes, clips of AOC's dismantling reply hit Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. One video of her poised delivery. "Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is a system that only sees leadership when it looks like you." Racked up 1 million views before she even left the building. By nightfall, it had crossed 10 million, plastered across timelines with captions like "Queen behavior" and "This is how you end an argument." Hashtags trended at lightning speed. AOC's lays. Humiliated. The leadership looks like this, all climbing into the top 10 within the hour. Twitter became a battlefield, but the imbalance was obvious. Supporters flooded the platform with clips, memes, and celebratory gifts. Even users who weren't political junkies shared the moment, not because of policy, but because of the drama. The cinematic reversal of arrogance being silenced by composure. TikTok stitched together edits with dramatic music overlays. AOC's calm stare paired with thunderous bits. Leavitt's stammer looped into comedic remixes. One particularly viral meme juxtaposed AOC's line with the iconic scene from The Avengers captioned, "And this is how you end the fight." Cable news couldn't ignore it either. That night, commentators across the spectrum replayed the clip on loop. On MSNBC, hosts leaned into the narrative of dignity triumphing over chaos. It wasn't just a rebuttal, one analyst declared. It was a clinic in how to command a room without raising your voice. Even CNN, often cautious with dramatization, headlined, "Ocasio Cortez turns the tables in viral exchange." Meanwhile, conservative outlets scrambled. Some tried to spin it, calling AOC performative or grandstanding, but the viral tide was impossible to stem. Every attempt to reframe the moment only amplified it because people rushed to watch the clip for themselves. And once they did, the verdict was clear. AOC had owned it. Celebrities chimed in, amplifying the shockwaves. Mark Ruffalo tweeted, "That was a masterclass." Kerry Washington posted the clip with the caption, "Poise, power, presence." Even athletes, musicians, and late-night comedians weighed in, turning AOC's reply into a cultural moment that extended far beyond politics. Leavitt, on the other hand, became a meme. Screenshots of her tightening jaw, her faltering words, her forced smile, plastered across Reddit threads and Instagram pages. One viral image read simply, "When you come for AOC unprepared." Another showed her fumbling for papers with the caption, "Curves doesn't work in real life." The humiliation wasn't just political. It was personal, public, inescapable. For someone who had built her brand on brash confidence, the optics were devastating. Her supporters tried to rally, but their defenses only fueled more mockery. On TikTok, teens who had never watched a congressional hearing before now imitated her stammer as part of trending challenges. But for AOC, the impact was different. Her calm, slicing delivery wasn't just a viral moment, it was validation. For working class families, for immigrants, for young activists, the exchange became a symbol. They saw in her not just a politician, but themselves. Someone underestimated, dismissed, interrupted, and yet still standing, still winning. Editorials the next morning captured the essence. The New York Times ran a column titled "Dignity as a Weapon." The Washington Post framed it as a generational clash, writing, "Leavitt spoke for the old guard of combative politics. Ocasio Cortez spoke for the future. Measured, inclusive, resonant." Even beyond newsrooms, the lesson reverberated. Teachers replayed the clip in classrooms to spark discussions about debate and dignity. Activists clipped it into highlight reels for rallies. Parents shared it with their kids as a model of composure in the face of arrogance. And yet, beyond the viral numbers, beyond the hashtags and memes, beyond the late-night jokes, something deeper was stirring. Because while millions laughed at Leavitt's downfall and cheered AOC's triumph, the confrontation spoke to something larger than entertainment. It wasn't just about one exchange in one chamber. It was about what kind of voices would define America's future. The applause had faded. The trending hashtags would eventually be replaced. But the symbolic weight of that moment remained heavy, waiting to be unpacked. Yet beyond the viral headlines lay a deeper lesson. In the aftermath of the viral storm, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez did something remarkable. She didn't just bask in the moment, she reframed it. She transformed a personal confrontation into a universal lesson, one that transcended party lines and social media metrics. Because what had occurred in that chamber wasn't merely a clash between two politicians, it was a test of values, of integrity, of the enduring power of dignity over arrogance. AOC's composure became the lens through which the moment could be understood. Noise had tried to dominate, but calm had answered. Aggression had attempted to intimidate, but conviction had held firm. The contrast wasn't subtle. It was stark, cinematic in its clarity. One figure erupted, histrionic and impulsive, relying on volume and theatrics. The other absorbed the storm, letting facts, poise, and clarity carry the weight of the argument. In that dynamic, audiences across the country glimpsed a fundamental truth. Real influence doesn't shout. It resonates. It was more than politics. The episode illuminated the kind of leadership that inspires not just those in the room, but millions watching from living rooms, subway cars, classrooms, and office breaks. It demonstrated that courage doesn't have to roar. That confidence doesn't need to belittle others to assert itself. That dignity, even when threatened, can hold more power than any insult hurled in its direction. For the progressive, immigrant-friendly, identity-proud audience that had long watched figures like AOC struggle against entrenched hierarchies, the lesson landed with personal resonance. It validated experiences of marginalization, dismissiveness, and being underestimated. The victory was not only political, it was moral. It affirmed that standing firm, speaking truth, and embracing one's identity are not just noble, they are transformative. And yet the teaching extended beyond a single ideological frame. Anyone who has ever faced someone who underestimated them, anyone who has been interrupted, dismissed, or silenced, could recognize themselves in this moment. It was a mirror of life's recurring challenge, the noise of arrogance versus the quiet power of integrity. AOC had turned a personal attack into an emblem of endurance, a symbol that truth, courage, and composure will always outlast empty aggression. Even in the viral aftermath, when memes mocked the defeated and hashtags celebrated the victor, AOC's takeaway was rooted in principle rather than spectacle. She reminded observers that politics, at its best, is a vessel for values, not ego. It's about listening to the people, amplifying marginalized voices, and refusing to normalize belittlement or fear. The spectacle, the virality, the headlines, they were secondary. The enduring victory lay in the affirmation that dignity is not performative. It is enduring. And so, in the quiet after the cheers, as cameras lingered and hashtags began to wane, the moral remained. It was simple, yet profound. Arrogance may dominate a moment, but dignity echoes through generations. Volume may intimidate the weak, but clarity inspires the strong. Noise may demand attention, but courage commands respect. The crowd cheered, but the real victory was the reminder that dignity never shouts. It echoes. Karoline Leavitt walked out of that chamber humbled, her once bold swagger replaced by the uneasy weight of public reckoning. Every viral clip, every trending hashtag, every meme captured the moment of her defeat, an unmistakable testament to the consequences of arrogance unchecked. In contrast, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez emerged not only victorious in the debate, but elevated in the eyes of the nation. Her calm, unwavering composure had not only silenced her detractor, but inspired millions who had been waiting to see courage meet chaos and prevail. This was more than a political exchange. It was the embodiment of a timeless narrative, hero versus villain, dignity against derision, substance over spectacle. One figure attempted to dominate through noise, the other through truth. One tried to diminish, the other amplified the values that matter: resilience, integrity, and the courage to speak for those too often silenced. And that is the heart of the story. It is not just about who won an argument in a chamber, but about what victory truly looks like. It's about the power of poise when confronted by aggression. It's about how authenticity resonates far beyond a moment, reaching into communities, homes, and screens across the country. If you believe dignity must always rise above arrogance, share this story. Subscribe to this channel. Add your voice to the movement that refuses to reward bluster over principle, that celebrates integrity over intimidation, that lifts those who stand firm in the face of dismissal. The crowd cheered that night, but its echo still resounds across America.